Lost Media.
Welcome to the Independent Voter Podcast from Independent Voter Project. We're going to expand a little bit. A new era of independent voter news that the journalists just don't cover, where we have these debates on a national level, really taking on issues so that people have more educated disagreements with each other. Let's just explain how the process really works. All right. Well, welcome back, everybody. We got Cara McCormick back again today, my favorite reformer from the opposite side of the country as me. Some of you know her for leading the charge on ranked choice voting, getting that passed, leading the efforts against Commission on Presidential Debates. And today we have a topic that even divides the independent community. It's funny because everybody goes, well, I have this position and I'm an independent and therefore you're not. And it's like the whole point of independence is that you disagree on all kinds of stuff, including issues like this. So, I want to start that out by saying, like, who gerrymanders more, Republicans or Democrats? I mean, we've probably gotten, we got hundreds of thousands of people coming to Independent Voter Project's website and then coming to the article that says, well, can you believe that there might be more Democrats in Texas than Republicans, and thousands of people, every day come in and read in the article on the 10 worst gerrymandered states, which is a very bipartisan list. And then we get all kinds of emails, some of them quite angry that we're reporting on statistics. And so, and this dynamic is, well, why are people so upset when you point out what's going on in California with them trying to overturn the Independent Redistricting Commission, or you individually focus on Texas? Isn't that the dynamics of gerrymandering are that the party in control designs the districts in order to reduce the influence of voters that aren't in their party? Isn't that right, Cara?
That's exactly what gerrymandering is. And it's sort of no surprise to me or to probably anybody who's worked in politics that politicians are going to use whatever power is available to them at whatever time. They're just going to use whatever power is there. So I sort of, the way I look at it is that Texas is using the power that's available to them to increase the number of Republicans in the Congress, and the Democrats are now using whatever power is available to them to increase the number of Democrats. And it's sort of a war without end. It looks like Texas is going to try to add 5 seats and California is going to try to add 5 seats. But then now we see, so they would sort of cancel each other out.
Well, and theoretically add 5 seats because, how
do they know?
How do they know? I mean, they're going to redraw districts that could draw in different candidates. I guess that's an aside, right, to the fact that can they really increase seats as much as they want or they think they can, right? But
on all the sides, yeah. Right? So and amazing the amount of power that they think that they have over the election that's going to occur a year and a half from now. It's amazing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and you wrote an article about in California specifically, which got some angry responses just because you wrote the facts of the polls and stuff, that there's basically, there's going to be about 1.5 million or 1.2 million independent voters that'll come out to vote. And they're really divided on this issue. Frankly, I can understand both perspectives, right? And one of the perspectives you get a lot is, well, Trump started this fight and Texas started this fight and we have to combat that.
That's definitely their main argument. Their main argument is that Texas started it and that you have to fight fire with fire and that you can't just roll over. That you have to use all the tools at your disposal to try to stop the Republicans, so that the Democrats, they didn't start it. They say that they really love the Independent Redistricting Commission. They really don't like gerrymandering, but in this case, they feel like they have to, like they're sort of over a barrel.
Yeah. Can I say, I don't know, there's very genuine independent people, very genuine nonpartisans, sophisticated, smart people, some of them professors at higher institutions who know are not part of the Democratic Party apparatus that share that argument. But at the same time, I think a lot of the folks in the space, it's not about California or Texas, right? It's like we see the long term as this. The only natural consequence, in my opinion, which is just one opinion among independents, I don't claim to represent every independent opinion, is that it's a race to the bottom and it doesn't stop. right? If California is going to go so far as to overturn an independent redistricting commission that was already voted on by the parties, granted, they have to go back to the voters to ask. So where does it stop?
Well, I mean, even if you just look at this particular instance, even if Texas adds 5 Republican seats and California has its voters pass Proposition 50, and then they're able to add 5 seats, leaving the Republicans, by the way, I think if it all turns out the way that they want, the Republicans will only have 3 congressional seats in the entire state of California, which is really kind of just extraordinary on its own. You know, there's states, it's Maryland then will try to add, and Ohio. I believe that Ohio even is obligated through an initiative that their voters passed in 2026. Is that right, Chad?
Well, yeah, and then there's different dynamics in these states too, right? That like in Texas, they've had orders in order to redistrict and stuff, but then like it's in the hands of the legislature, right? And not saying that that's right, but what's unique is that, you take California, now you have the governor of New York saying she's going to do it in her state, where voters have said, we want this out of the partisan process, right? And it's almost
Absolutely.
it's almost like a sacred cow. Like if in the good government space, it's a sacred cow. Like we passed this, we took this out of the hands of the politicians. Now we can have another debate about whether in actuality are these independent commissions still controlled by partisan forces. That's a separate argument.
Yeah.
But right, but at least for the idea of it, and that the some having some effect on it, like they're willing to give up sacred cows that like you put on your mantle of saying this is how New York and California believe in democracy. They're saying we're going to take that off our shelves, right? Because we need a fight. We need to fight fire with fire, in their words. So, what
I mean, and
what,
some of these Democrats truly believe that there is an authoritarian, totalitarian takeover of the United States underway, and that they need to do everything they can to stop that, and that it all comes down to this 2026 November election. And there are very, very, very smart people who've studied democracy in our country and on a global level, and those people are saying that, if we don't make it through the 2026 election victorious, as in the Democrats victorious, that we won't have a country after this, that we're not going to have a democracy after this. And so that fear is being used to drive the overturning of independent commissions. It looks like in California that could happen. In New York, they have an independent commission, and the governor is saying, to hell with that. We're going to just like Gavin Newsom, we're going to fight fire with fire. It's also Wes Moore in Maryland. I don't know how many Republican districts they have in Maryland. Illinois, J.B. Pritzker, who also has presidential ambitions, is looking at changing the redistricting there.
There's an example right there. Is everybody looks at like, okay, I'm going to look from my perspective at this moment in time, right? This moment in time, Trump and the Republicans instigated this fight, and therefore we're going to rationalize doing things to mitigate the effects of the fight they started, right? But take a state like Illinois. Is anybody argue that Illinois isn't gerrymandered to death by the Democratic Party?
Well, all the Democratic states and all the Republican states are all gerrymandered by. This is nothing new. This is how it has been. This is why that there was a rise of sort of citizens' movements to create independent redistricting commissions in the beginning, because even that we're talking about that there's Democratic seats and Republican seats and safe seats and not safe seats, it's all because they've gerrymandered the hell out of all of this for the last, for decades.
Yes, but I can already hear it, and you can already see the comments, the hundreds of comments on Facebook and the emails sent to our inbox, responding to our articles saying, no, but this is the fight. To your point, this is the end of authoritarianism, and this is the end of, but like you just said, like, it's not like this started yesterday, right? I mean, gerrymandering has been going on for a long time, and you can have this debate about who started it, who did it first, and who is worse, who's benefiting most seats. I've heard from a lot of folks on the right side that say, just from a pure gamesmanship, if you're the Republican strategist and you're Trump and you're looking at it, say, yeah, let's play this game. because when you play it out, there's more seats for Republicans to pick up if you just race to the bottom than there are the Democrats. Now,
unfortunately, that's true. I mean, that's exactly it, Chad, is that they have obviously, the Republicans, thought through the strategy all the way from start to finish. And I don't think that people realize that in the end, if the states that are controlled by Democrats redistrict in time for 2026, and the Republicans do the same thing, the Republicans are still going to wind up with more. And it's just so interesting to me that this is all before any elections actually happen. This is before candidates even introduce themselves. This is way before voters, choose their choices in the primaries or in the general. And they're trying to figure out what the outcome's going to be so far before any actual voters, are even involved or tuned in. But really, they're doing everything that the system will allow them to do, because that's what happens in a democracy. So, I don't begrudge anybody doing this. I can I can have my own opinions about it, but my experience with politicians and with parties and with these structures of power within our democracy is people always take whatever power is given to them. They always push it as far as it can go. They don't leave things on the table just, to be nice or to preserve good government. That's not what's important to them right now. What's important to them is winning.
and we know, I mean, it's no secret. Everybody knows, everybody in the political space knows this is part of Newsom's strategy. This is not a pejorative. I'm not saying this in a negative context. If you're somebody that's a governor and wants to be the lead dog for the Democratic Party's presidential ticket, you got to pick up a national issue and, go and put something on the map. And in Gavin Newsom's defense, he's done that, right? This is part of a presidential campaign of raising his profile in a non-election year. But same time, is there anybody, we're wonky people talking about politics and off year election, and we're in these sort of the average person sitting, do they care about this issue? Are they even thinking about this issue is the question.
I think that evidenced by the fact that there's hundreds of thousands of people coming to our website this month to look at voter statistics and to read our stories about gerrymandering, and then thousands of people commenting on Facebook, which, I moderate some of that Facebook discussion. There is a lot of engagement. I know that in my own family, it's definitely become, more of a subject, and gerrymandering in the political reform space. We count among our heroes Katie Fahey, who led the redistricting movement in Michigan. They made a whole movie about Katie. It's called Slay the Dragon on Netflix. I definitely encourage everybody to watch it. It's a great film.
Yeah, and bringing up Katie, she's the one, her organization, the People, have signed on with a number, including Independent Voter Project. We have Veterans for All Voters, Open Primaries. There's 9 or 10 organizations, and I assume there's going to be more coming, that basically signed an open letter saying, we oppose and condemn gerrymandering in California, Texas, and everywhere else, right? So the question is whether there can be enough folks come together on a national level, because you say, okay, well, what do you do about it? Great, you wrote a letter and you condemned it, right? But how do you stop this race to the bottom, right?
I mean, the only way that I can figure is that you educate people about it, at least so that they know what's going on, and, don't give anybody the unrealistic expectation that it can be stopped. I mean, I do really feel like we're more observers of the chaos rather than being able to sort of step in and do something about it at this point. These powers are on both sides. The partisans are much more powerful than the independents, but it's also sort of interesting if you just look at the microcosm of California. There's about 5 million in California. This is going to have to go to the ballot. So that's what happened this last week. Is the legislature and the governor moved Proposition 50 onto the ballot in California, and so just in 90 days, not very many days, the Democrats, Republicans, Independents, Greens, they're all going to have a chance to vote on it in California, which is definitely different than Texas. In Texas, it was just by fiat practically, right?
But on that point, yeah, it's going on the ballot, but who's running these campaigns? Where's the messaging coming from, right? Because I don't know, I live in the nonpartisan space, and there sure ain't enough money to run a statewide effort to educate voters in California, right? So is that, though, also a problem? Is that, okay, now you have a campaign, you got the partisan interests that where all the money is, right, are running the for campaign and the against campaign. And so if you're a voter who's not thinking about this on the daily basis, aren't you just going to be subject to going, well, this messaging is coming from this group and this messaging is coming from this group. And then your decision isn't made on, well, this is a national race to the, they're not thinking about it in terms of, oh, this has been going on for hundreds of years and this is a race to the bottom. And well, even if the Democrats are right here, then they might actually lose on a national fight level. Like, they're going to be just clips of a campaign message is what's going to ultimately drive people's decision making, don't you think?
Well, I mean, I definitely have noticed in all kinds of reform efforts that it's very hard for the partisans to not be partisan in their messaging. And independent messaging is, definitely what appeals to most people. In California in particular, I think there's 5 million no party preference voters. And there was a recent poll that just was published this week from UC Berkeley and Politico. It showed that when you sort of look down into the crosstabs, that the Democrats are certainly, they're for this. They're for Prop 50, like 79-11. And the Republicans, they're against Prop 50 by almost the same margin. But there's the 5 million independents are split. They're split. The people who have registered no party preference, and there's a huge percentage, 1.2 million of them, that are completely undecided. So that is where Prop 50 is going to be decided. It's going to be decided by independent, no party preference voters who have rejected both of the two parties, who are not members, who are unaffiliated. And we'll see, do they believe the Democratic argument, the Republican argument, or do they say for themselves, okay, this is an independent redistricting commission, we're going to go with the good government. We're going to, I might be anti-Trump, but I'm still for the sanctity of the Constitution of California that we voted for to try to stop politicians from doing just this. So it's going to be super interesting to watch. And I think it's very cool that an issue like gerrymandering is bringing so many people to Independent Voter Network and Independent Voter Project.
Well, I think ironically, the fact that, like I say, you can look at it. I know people that look at what Trump's doing positively. I know people that look at it and think he's, the end of the world, right? But regardless of whether you think it's born out of ill intention or good intention, there's some merit to the fact that not doing this with the conventional norms of quietly drawing the districts in the back room and not really making voters understand how their vote's being diluted and just being the bull in the china shop saying, well, these are the rules we play for here. I'm just going to do it so blatantly. There's an argument to be made that that's actually healthy because it's spurring a discussion that needs to be had, right? Yes, we've had independent redistricting commissions passed and everything, but that's been a derivative of like people in politics really moving, who really care about the Katie Fahey's of the world, who, go and do this. But on a broad level of making this issue, so apparent to the public, I think it's probably advanced the conversation and education about gerrymandering, in this last few weeks, what's taken decades, right? So,
yeah.
And I know,
yeah, for sure. And that's a good thing, Chad. I mean, that's really a good thing, that the more light that is shown on the manipulations by the two major parties, the more awareness that there is about that is the thing that will help lead us forward to a sort of a post-partisan future that we all can imagine, where everything's not so completely manipulated, and where independents aren't, just shut out. There's no independent districts. There's no safe independent districts that we're talking about here. Independents don't even have a seat at this.
Right. That can lead us into millions of discussions. I know we're running up on time already. I want to put one thing on the table. Maybe we can talk about this next time, right? Just for the listeners, you thinking about it. Well, okay, if you're diluting voter rights and you're doing this, like, how is that legal, right? Well, let's put it here. For a long time, the courts have been fighting about the illegality of gerrymandering, but there's usually got to be there's a suspect class at stake. Usually it's under race-based gerrymandering, right? You can't design districts to dilute the power of an African-American voter or a Latino voter, right? The question really hasn't, to date, when you say, hey, well, the Republicans, you can't do that. Democrats, you can't do that. Just generally, right? You can't do that for your partisan interest. The courts have said that's a state issue, right? We're not going to get at there. A question I would present, which we can bring up on another show, is I've been talking with some folks here is what, like, okay, you're an independent voter. If you're a Democrat, you get screwed, for lack of a better term, in Texas. If you're a Republican, you get screwed, for lack of a better term, in California. If you're an independent, you get screwed in both states, right? Because they're diluting your power in both states. As an independent, you've made a First Amendment, you've exercised your First Amendment to say, I do not want to join a political party, right? You have the right to join a party. You have the right not to join a party. The question is, if that's a fundamental right and the parties are going and diluting the power of your vote in all these states, is there a lawsuit to be had to say, you know what, California and Texas, you are both wrong. And just like gerrymandering to dilute the power of an African-American vote is illegal under the Constitution, is it not violative of an individual's right to vote just by being an independent voter? Isn't what both you're doing, whether it's in California or Texas? So I don't have the answer to that. I don't know if you want to comment on that before we leave, but I think that's a discussion that should be had.
Well, yeah, it's like, how meaningful is your vote, really? You know, everything's been decided ahead of time, just based on where you live, by the people who are drawing the lines. How meaningful is your vote? It's fascinating to watch. I do think that there's something to be said about when there are big breakdowns in our democracy, perhaps they can lead to breakthroughs, because when you shine a light on some of the granularity about how all of this goes forth, you know, maybe people who are like Katie, you know, rise up and figure out how to change it, at least in their state, using citizen initiatives like we've done in Maine, and like, you know, happen all over maybe 25 states have the ability for citizens to petition their government to make changes when they don't like what the legislature and the people in power are doing. The people have some power in at least half the states. Anyway, it's great to talk to you, Chad. I look forward to all of the engagement online at Independent Voter Network and on Independent Voter News, and we'll keep covering the story. We're going to write a story today, tomorrow, about the other states that are getting into the mix here now that Texas and California have joined the battle.
Well, we'll talk again next week, Cara, and I'm going to go home and tell my kids that they have a democratic choice for dinner. They can have either chicken nuggets or spaghetti.
That's great. All right, Chad. All right. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.
This is the Independent Voter Podcast, sponsored by the Independent Voter Project and produced by OLAS Media. Remember, you can always find the Independent Voter Podcast or the How It Really Works series at ivn.us. Follow and subscribe at olasmedia.com.
OLAS Media.